The people who are going to speak to us, I don't have power, may I practice mendicancy and ask you to consider filling this section so that a person who is speaking is not looking at just empty chairs. Thank you. Yes, empty on the side is okay, but empty right in front of a speaker is. Some of you have been speaking for a long time, and you know what it means to just look at empty chairs, and it's not very encouraging. All right, thank you. That's much better. So once again, mendicancy actually works. Good afternoon. Welcome to this fall lecture of the Paul Hiebert Center for Global Theology and World Christianity. And we are pleased that several administrators and faculty colleagues are here. And of course, students, we are pleased that you are here as well. And other guests, there are guests who are not either students or administrators or faculty colleagues who are here with us. We are pleased that you are here. This is a significant topic that we'll be conversing about this afternoon in the next couple of hours. And we have three guests who are going to be helping us in the conversation. And but before we actually reveal the topic, that is not a secret, we have asked the President Parent to come and offer a word of prayer, after which time I will introduce the lecturer and the two respondents, and we'll go from there. Thank you, President Parent.
Thank you. Let us pray. Father, you appeared to Abraham many years ago in Genesis 12 when you made the promise that his seed would be a blessing to many nations. And Father, we know that your Son, Jesus Christ, has come and that Jesus Christ is that seed, and he is the fulfillment that he and indeed the church, your church, is to be a blessing to many nations, even as it is to be constituted by many nations. And so it is, Lord, that we come to this lecture. We pray, Lord, for Dr. Ruiz as he brings his words, that he's prepared. Father, these are ever timely words for us. Father, for every hearer here, I pray that you would give us ears to hear in terms of next steps that this means for us as individuals, us for our future charges, but also, most pressingly, TEDS as an institution. We pray for the respondents. Pray for rich conversation coming out of all these papers. Lord, we are a work in progress. We're seeking to understand. We haven't arrived, but we desperately seek to have a better grasp of how we can play a part in the Abrahamic promise of being a blessing to the nations, even as the nations converge around your Son, Jesus Christ. So we give you this time. We thank you for the fellowship. Thank you, risen Lord, that you have saved us and you have called us to participate with you in this vital mission. Amen.
Thank you, President Parent, for praying for us as we open the time for conversation that will be that we will have, because people have worked to bless us and to help us in the conversation on the topic. I'm pleased to welcome back to Trinity Lester Edwin J. Ruiz, who is currently Director of Accreditation and global engagement with the Association of Theological Schools in the United States and Canada. Lester and I go way back when the two of us were inducted, oriented, whatever the word it is, in the basement of an institution in Chicago when he was beginning his work at the Association of Theological Schools, and I was also being invited into serving as a member of the Board of Commissioners in that damp basement. That's where we were kind of oriented to ATS, and we have journeyed together for these many years. It was 2008, that's right? So it's been a few years now, and our paths have crossed across the globe, literally. The last time we were together in a different venue in terms of globe was in 2019 in Crete, and it was about global theological education. And so I'm pleased that Lester is here, and his topic is the futures of theological education in a globally shaped world. The first respondent is, I will say the name officially, although it's difficult for me to say it that way, James R. Moore, known to me as Jim. He is currently Director of Accreditation at the Association of Theological Schools in the US and Canada. But of course, our paths have also crossed globally. The last time we were together globally was also in 2019 in Crete for the same Global Theological Education Forum. And Jim is a known quantity to us. So I will say welcome back home here to respond to the lecture that is going to be presented by our colleague and friend Lester Ruiz. Truth in Advertising. The next time we will be in a global theological kind of context will be a few weeks from now in Turkey, November 13 to 19 to 18, where there will be the International Council of Theological Education meeting. The three musketeers will be there together at the same time for that meeting as well. So that's the Truth in Advertising. The second respondent is the Reverend George Davis, who is senior pastor of Hershey Free Church and a member of the TIU Board of Regents. We are pleased, Reverend Davis, that you have carved out significant time to be here early, coming here this morning and being with us for this important time of conversation on an important topic. Thank you. Yes, we are pleased, particularly that as a member of the Board of Regents, you are helping us in this conversation. Second aspect of the Truth in Advertising is the current Interest magazine has an article on global awareness and engagement, and where our lecturer Lester Ruiz's work figures prominently. So let's do it the way it is done globally. We welcome with applause before we hear the speaker. So let's applaud for our speakers.
Thank you very much. One knows that one has arrived in global theological education when one is considered to be one of the three musketeers by TNU. It's a great privilege for me to be here, and I am grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this important and timely conversation on world Christianities and global theologies. For my part this afternoon, I would like to try to do three things. Share a few examples of the kinds of work we are doing at the Association of Theological Schools, particularly in the Global Awareness and Engagement Initiative. Second, to offer some critical and constructive reflections on these narratives. And three, along the way, to pose before us a number of challenging, self-critical questions that ATS and its global partners have found helpful in this wonderful, mysterious, but compelling journey we fondly call global awareness and engagement. Let me begin with a few words of context and framework for my understanding of global awareness and engagement. On the North American continent, despite the distressing decline, not to mention often cavalier attitude towards sustained reflection and action regarding the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, there's no question in my mind that the past 2 years, at least, has rendered more prominent the historic pandemic-like infirmities of our planet, not just in the areas of economy, environment, governance, health, and culture, but also in politics, in public discourse, in technology, and in what Robert Bellah called habits of the heart. These historic infirmities have been rightly called the old normal by some because they have inhabited our world unevenly, to be sure, for at least the past 500 years. Many peoples of this continent, not to mention our planet, continue to be dispersed, displaced, and dislocated, their identities profoundly racialized and ethnicized, as well as gendered and sexualized, their lives callously commodified and pathologized, their contexts militarized and securitized, and their bodies and memories incarcerated, rendered invisible, erased, or forgotten. For many, it still feels as if the worlds of power, privilege, and legitimacy are simultaneously experienced as even more explicitly and unapologetically predatory and inherently violent, sometimes not readily visible to us, almost inescapably authoritarian, undeniably xenophobic, deeply apathetic to collective wisdom and truth-seeking or speaking, and definitely aporophobic. That said, these historic infirmities have also been marked by equally historic, transformative human capacities for, quote, acts of justice and acts of mercy worldwide, including demonstrations of hospitality, solidarity, and social responsibility, as well as expressions of self-sacrifice, patriotic duty, and accountability. New forms of collaboration, cooperation, and alliances between and among the private and public sectors in the service of the, quote, common good also have emerged, although their long-term sustainability, not to mention whether these changes are substantive or merely self-serving, still remains to be seen. Creativity, innovation, and flexibility in education, for example, with a more generalized pivot to multiple modalities of learning, including remote learning, have also marked our present worldwide landscapes, although whether these pivots are temporary or long-term civilizational responses to the crises still needs to be demonstrated, if not more carefully studied and articulated. We all acknowledge, I believe, both with embarrassed sadness and modulated joy, that accredited graduate theological education has not been strangers to these historic infirmities and human capacities, particularly in what has come to be known as the age of the Anthropocene. Our efforts to introduce theological education within and beyond the boundaries of our communities of accountability and our national borders have had uneven results, if sometimes unintended consequences. At best, some schools have been sites of learning, teaching, and research that have contributed to enlarging worldviews, global interdependence, and intercultural competencies. At worst, some schools have been sites of uncharitable, even destructive practices that have prevented the fullness and richness of shared human thinking, being, and doing to flourish. The often underappreciated opportunity, however, is that both these multiple infirmities and transformative human capacities seem to be posing a serious challenge to our fundamental assumptions about the practices of human community and identity, more generally, and in accredited graduate theological education more specifically. They may be interpreted as inviting us to revisit the best in who we are as a planetary species, particularly in terms of diversity, solidarity, and community, of hospitality, social responsibility, and friendship, of trust, joy, and love, and of resistance and struggle, as well as accountability, humility, kindness, forgiveness, trust, and decency. Whatever challenges, uncertainties, even dangers the past 2 years have wrought, one thing seems to remain constant. Our world sorely needs, on the one hand, a personal, quiet resolve to be good and kind, and on the other hand, an institutional commitment to be just and humble, all of which are made possible by what many faith and religious-based traditions understand as the capacity of human beings to be accountable to the good, the true, and the beautiful that are both within and without each of us, with God's help. My own wager is that those of us who are engaged in accredited graduate theological education must continuously ask ourselves, in what ways are these multiple old and new infirmities interrelated? And if they are related, how can our normative, aspirational, and mandatory responses to them be more fully and effectively articulated? What forms of intersectional analyses are required? What learning, teaching, and research pedagogies and strategies are needed? What political engagements and interventions are demanded? What dispositional, behavioral, and institutional changes are necessary? Or to put it in the insightful language of UNESCO, what should the next normal look like? Or to put it in the language of T. Tianu's constant, disruptive, but profoundly truthful reminder, global awareness and engagement are inextricably theological, and therefore we need to hold ourselves accountable theologically and missionally. In this context, what does global awareness and engagement look like strategically, programmatically, and theologically in these times of multiple infirmities, particularly when ATS member schools are focused mainly on addressing the pressing and immediate challenges that face their respective communities about and to which they feel primary responsibility and accountability, where the global challenge of the crisis looms so large that the only seeming apparent credible response is local engagement. How does one continue to appreciate and embody the spirit of global awareness and engagement, especially in contexts where, on the one hand, we are constantly reminded not only of our embeddedness in an ecology that is global, not only of our global interconnectedness, of the global permeability of boundaries, of shared futures and destinies, and even more so now, the increasing awareness of the uneven effects and responses to the crisis due to pre-existing historic disparities in our world, but also, on the other hand, and at the same time, are called to respond to the immediacy of these global invasions, permutations, and evasions in our neighborhoods, even our homes, and where the demands of the so-called new normal, including major pivots in institutional practices, educational delivery modalities, and dispositional sensibilities, could eclipse the spiritual, emotional, formational, ecological, and health and safety needs of ATS member schools, and their constituencies and self-selected publics. By global, I mean processes of differentiation and formation that, quote, maintains a crucial reference to the world's horizon as a space of human relations, of meaning held in common, of signification or possible signification. The mission of ATS is to promote the improvement and enhancement of theological schools to the benefit of communities of faith and the broader public. Nearly half of the 280 member schools of ATS, of which TEDS is a significant example and presence, have mission statements that include words like world, global, international, and all people, humankind. Trinity International University's own mission statement proclaims, Trinity's mission is to educate men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. And the Paul Hiebert Center for World Christianity and Global Theology commits itself to promote strategic collaboration between North American and majority world Christians for the advancement of the gospel and to facilitate the emergence of theological perspectives that are biblically faithful, contextually relevant, and which reflect global diversity in the body of Christ. For ATS, as I imagine for TEDS, one of the markers of educational quality and institutional integrity is being globally aware and engaged. The accreditation standards, for example, Standard 1.4 states in part, institutional integrity also includes how the school attends to global awareness and engagement within the context of its mission, theological commitments, and resources. Not unlike the Hiebert Center, ATS has its Global Awareness and Engagement Initiative that serves both ATS and the Commission as they fulfill their mission and mandate. The overall goal of the Global Awareness and Engagement Initiative is to provide contexts and opportunities among ATS member schools and their publics and constituencies to define, embody, and cultivate global awareness and engagement. The initiative has 6 board-approved strategic and overlapping directions. 1, understanding effective partnerships. 2, global engagement within North America. 3, cultivating scholarly and programmatic trade routes or exchanges. 4, contributing to a pan-Christian conversation on theological education. And 5, educational and degree programs of study. And 6, continuing research and care. The initiative is based on a threefold value proposition that 1, quality of and accountability in accredited graduate theological education includes how schools attend to global awareness and engagement within the context of its mission, theological commitments, and resources. That 2, global awareness and engagement in learning, teaching, and research is demonstrated by helping students respect, engage, and learn from global perspectives and sources, understand the global connectedness and mutuality of theological education, and increase their capacities for service and learning in globally interconnected contexts. And that the futures of good theological education in North America, at least in the context of ATS, requires that member schools commit to a mutual process of educating and accompanying each other about what global awareness and engagement means for and in their respective and shared contexts. Over the past 5 years, at least, the initiative has engaged in the following programs as part of the implementation of its 6 strategic directions. I share these activities with you this afternoon because they are examples of how an institution such as ATS but more important, how any institution, perhaps including TEDS, can engage its constituencies, global partners, and publics in the work of theological education. These are learning examples, markers, if you will, of global awareness and engagement. 1. As part of its collaborative work with the Association for Theological Education in Southeast Asia, the initiative over the years has arranged for resource persons from ATS member schools, for ATISEA's teacher academies, their methodology seminars and doctoral colloquia, other special themed webinars, and accreditation visits. 2. As a major partner of the Global Forum of Theological Educators, the one that Teet had mentioned earlier, ATS since 2018 has provided leadership and support for these forums, the last one held virtually in 2021 on the theme Theological Education as Formation, Conversation on Practices, Contexts, and Futures, also in the plural. The event was well attended with participants from at least 40 countries, representing all 5 ecclesial family constituencies of the Global Forum for Theological Educators, Evangelicals, Pentecostals, Historic Protestant, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and Independent Chinese and African churches. The initiative and the leadership education program of ATS have a joint ongoing 5-year funded project entitled Intercultural Sensitivity and Global Awareness Training, especially for faculty, which explores the intersections of race, global awareness and engagement, and intercultural competencies, assuming that diversity is constitutive of these areas of life and work. ATS and the International Council of Evangelical Theological Education, ISET, the one that is meeting in Izmir in Turkey in a few weeks, has a joint agreement known as the Playa Bonita Affirmations to pursue joint educational activities and support each other's programs and educational resources, including in learning, teaching, and research. They also agreed to explore the possibility of strengthening cooperation in the areas of accreditation and quality assurance, including the creation of a degree program equivalency form and process to assist member schools in determining and documenting the equivalencies of degree programs and credits offered by their respective constituencies in the global context. In the context of these programs, what are we learning about global awareness and engagement? 1, there is a growing conviction that accredited graduate theological education is not only now thoroughly and undeniably global in character, but that any future for theological education, particularly in the global north, includes how ATS member schools comprehend and address collaboratively the challenges posed by its current global engagements, particularly in the context of effective partnerships and the strategic global engagement within North America, especially, and intentional cultivation of the mutual scholarly and programmatic trade routes, participation in pan-Christian conversations on theological education, and accreditation and quality assurance. I just found out today, for example, that the scholars organization that of which you lead is actually meeting here at TEDS for a conversation that is, I consider, one of kind of important involvements that, for example, TEDS has in terms of the Global Scholars programs. Yeah. 2, there's an increasing consensus that global awareness engagement now must be understood more fully, not only as geographical reach or extension, but also as cultural, educational, and theological practice, which are directly related to diversity, intercultural competence, contextuality, and change. And 3rd, an acknowledged need to embrace theological education, both formal and non-formal, accredited and not, as a gathering, sharing, and mutual, quote, learning together among the member schools and their publics, local, national, regional, global, at the same time that attention is given to the unevenness of certain resources for theological education, whether physical, financial, technological, and their consequences for quality education and participation in the sharing of resources. Learning global awareness and engagement requires difficult but necessary conversations, which I am quite certain are already familiar to all of us gathered here today. And so let me just underscore 4. First, the importance of deliberation or dialogue that is truthful. At the same time, they are respectful, especially in the current cultures of untruth that have normalized lying, hypocrisy, and predatory self-interest in public state-centric discourses and action. Second, the necessity of creating, nurturing, and defending the res publica, the common, which acknowledges profound contextual differences based on racial, ethnic, gender, class, sexual orientation, ecclesial identities, and disciplinary characteristics or solidarities, and affirms mutual obligations and relationships while simultaneously accepting norms of tolerance, decency, hospitality, and principled inclusion. Third, the need to redefine educational institutions as local, regional, and global ecological systems that are a combination of private and public spaces, virtual, face-to-face, hybrid, a heterogeneous assemblage of physical, human, financial, environmental resources, including buildings, livelihoods, technologies, as well as ideologies, knowledge, structures, and administrative mechanisms, behaviors and dispositions, religious and scientific inspiration, not to mention economic, political, cultural interests and commitments. In short, education as a biosphere. And fourth, the desirability of multilateral, multi-layered, and multi-perspectival partnerships and voices that seriously attend to the intersectionalities of the issues related to globally shaped and oriented theological education and ministry, intentionally deepening and broadening sensitivities to the nuances and specificities of asymmetrical space, time, and place, and recognize the multidirectional flows of interdependence and relative autonomy in global North-South relationships, and also flattening power differentials arising out of the unevenness of human, financial, and physical resources, and of history and location, and enhance solidarity and friendship across boundaries of diversity, difference, and plurality. And what of possible next steps, especially in the atheist context, possibly trinities? Let me offer 3, I think, difficult next steps. 1, creating regularized opportunities for information sharing and their documentation regarding the activities related to global awareness and engagement initiatives through already existing mechanisms of the organization itself, organizing occasional issue-focused discussions such as these, especially involving global partners, sharing of resources, digital and otherwise, in the context of the more recent affirmation of the post-pandemic values, which are also shared, I think, globally, of learning together, of the notion of a hybrid, and of being better together. 2, developing sustained and sustainable processes of formal and informal consultation, education, and training regarding globally shaped theological education and how it may be enhanced and or improved through the contributions not only of institutions in the global north or the majority world. The use of the global north dates me, actually. I admit that. But especially in the global south. dating Lester Ruiz, which are informed by context-specific values, commitments, and dispositions. Developing and implementing larger and more intentional communication strategies, consisting again of documentation, production of materials for use and reuse in their dissemination. For example, we're thinking of a digital curated resource hub on global awareness and engagement that includes materials from global partners and from the majority world and made available globally. My own dream, and these are my conclusions now, my own dream for those of us who have the privilege and responsibility of living in the so-called global north, and precisely because the so-called global north is marked by power, privilege, even entitlement, is that our strategies for global awareness and engagement, given our institutional, statutory, and self-imposed limitations, need to be tempered by what earlier I called acts of justice and acts of mercy, which means we need to strengthen the religio-moral grounds for and encouragement of good theological education offered by our educational institutions. Another way of putting this is to say that part of an organization's institutional integrity is to be responsible and accountable for its own educational house. But this can only be done by acknowledging the right of others to their own homes and by accepting our shared obligation to create, nurture, and defend an equitably shared, if not common, educational oikonomy. In the first instance, good fences make good neighbors. In the second instance, it takes a village to bring up a child. One thing more must be confessed, however, and that for what purpose? Global awareness and engagement. And the answer can only be a theological one, namely, not only that the whole earth is full of God's glory, as the seraphim in Isaiah 6:3 were calling to each other, but that the fullness of the earth is the glory of God. And may it be so with God's help. I was asked by Teeth to bring to your attention also, there's a sheet of paper on the table so that there are some questions that we had had conversations around, and later on we will have the chance to maybe explore some of those questions and the questions that might be raised in this group as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear friend Lester, for priming the pump for us this afternoon. And I now will call the respondents in the order that I mentioned. First, James Moore, and then George Davis. They know the appointed time they have, and after their responses, I will call on the next person to help us in the conversation. Don't worry, we'll be out of here by 5 o'clock as we promised you. We just ask you to be fully still here. So, James Moore.
Thank you, Dr. Tianu. And I wish to express my thanks as well for the invitation to participate in this critically and timely conversation, the futures of theological education in a globally shaped world. It is a privilege to participate, but also to reflect on a topic as an insider, having spent 29 years in this community. Dr. Ruiz, thank you for your helpful presentation, reminding us the fullness of the earth is the glory of God. Thank you for naming both the multiple infirmities and the transformative human capacities that exist in this moment of global dissonance. Let me suggest that the TEDS community could easily sit on its laurels in the matter of global theological education. In fact, look to your seatmate. While on this campus community, we boast 50 nationalities, alumni who serve in over 100 countries. And among those graduates, key theological educators, principals, presidents, deans, denominational officials, and scholar pastors in their respective global localities. Of course, TEDS is globally aware and engaged. But are all the laurels spent? Has TEDS served its God-given purpose in the global evangelical world, and now it's time to fade into the sunset? Let me suggest that the answer to this question may be a resounding yes. If theological education, and TEDS in this particular case, fails to reposition our understanding, that is, our awareness, and our practices, our engagement, into the contemporaneity of the presence of this discussion. Let me offer 3 questions. First of all, who are our friends, both institutionally and personally? Global awareness and engagement begin by looking for crocodiles on the beach in the rain. My friend, whom you've just heard from, knows where I'm going with this. One of our early shared experiences in global theological education was looking for crocodiles on the beach in Panama in the pouring rain during an ISET meeting. I remember little of the content of the meeting, but the shared experience of the ridiculous, that is, looking for crocodiles on the beach in Panama in the pouring rain, I will never forget. What shared experiences with global friends can you recall? What institution-wide shared experiences with global friends can TEDS recall? I submit that the sometimes ridiculous shared experiences with global friends might provide metaphorical ways of relating and understanding our globe that are often lost in the mundane. Global friendships are marked by mutuality and reciprocity, an awareness and engagement with another rooted in lifelong relationships of learning and evidenced by theological accountability at its heart. Lasting friendships are created through intentionality. They are not organic, as Dr. Nancy Newall from Brandon University in Manitoba points out. I wonder, as TEDS alumni spread throughout the whole earth to engage in God's redemptive world, according to our mission statement, if our relationships with alumni are intentional. Are they marked by continued mutuality and reciprocity? What continuing debt do we owe our alums? How might we continue to learn from them to shape our own global awareness and engagement? Who are our friends, both institutionally and personally? Question number 2. What is our curriculum? ATS Standard 3.7 calls on schools to, quote, demonstrate an intensely collaborative approach to student learning and formation by developing a cohesive and holistic curriculum, regardless of modality, that involves faculty and, as appropriate in the school's context, others, both in designing and in evaluating curriculum. Collaborative, cohesive, holistic, appropriate to the school's context. In what ways do we engage our global friends in the curriculum development process? Do global alumni, global students, global stakeholders contribute to the design and evaluation of the curriculum? Surely they have an informed opinion about what is educationally effective in their studies. Do course texts, presentations, and our own readings facilitate Global conversations in the classroom, such as the one that we're experiencing here today? What about faculty, administration, board, and staff? Often faculty are said to be the curriculum. What is our own level of global awareness and engagement? We travel globally to share our expert North American opinions in the global context, but more importantly, are we mutual learners in those experiences? Are they shared experiences with global friends? Are we ethnographers who carefully watch and attentively listen to our hosts in those global experiences? Do we practice, as Dr. Ruiz encouraged us, active, empathetic, principled, and humble listening, as well as translation and appropriation? What is our curriculum? Question number 3. What does "in the world" from the TED's mission statement mean for Trinity International University? I clearly remember the school year 1995-1996. I guess I'm dating myself too. This institution was in the throes of becoming a university, and we discovered, much to our chagrin, that Trinity University already exists in San Antonio, Texas. However, Trinity International University did not exist. And so the legal merger of Trinity College and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, together with the initiation of Trinity Graduate School and the merger of Simon Greenleaf School of Law, became Trinity International University. I should know I wrote the merger report for the accreditors. Not really by great intent, but Trinity University was already taken. Trinity is not unique, as Dr. Ruiz mentioned, with nearly 50% of ATS institutions including global statements in their missions or in their names, as is our case. My question is this, and it's an evaluative, it's an assessment question. If an accreditor were to evaluate TEDS on the sole mission criterion of "in the world," what evidence would be present to demonstrate educational effectiveness? In what ways does "in the world" affect institutional planning? Does the curriculum reflect the world? How does the world shape student learning and formation? Do library and classroom materials include the world? Do the school's personnel look and think like the world? In what ways are school resources shared with the world? Do the school's power structures engage the world? In what ways is decision-making informed by the world? Friends, I need not tell you that the world is no longer out there. I live on a cul-de-sac, 13 homes and 13 families. 2 are Vietnamese, 1 family Jordanian, 1 Hispanic, 1 Polish-Lithuanian, 1 Puerto Rican, and my next-door neighbors, Albanian Muslim, who joyfully share the breaking of the Ramadan fast with our family. I could stay on my side of the street and fail to be the Christian Samaritan who can become globally aware and engaged by simply crossing the street and sharing of myself, my tomatoes, my strawberries, my apples, my Jesus. Trinity, too, has been uniquely placed in a global neighborhood. One need drive only a few miles for a diverse cultural, linguistic, economic community with whom we have resources to share. Global awareness and engagement is no longer out there. What does the mission "in the world" mean for TEDS? 3 questions to shape the future of global theological education. Who are our friends? What is our curriculum? What is our mission? The decade ahead will be the most telling. I believe those schools who truthfully probe the depths of their own possible futures will inevitably find that global awareness and engagement is not only a necessary part of their future, but a reality essential for survival. Gone are the days when we can sit on our laurels, believe that if we build it, they will come, when academic expertise is local rather than global. The challenge is significant, the opportunities boundless, the mission critical. My prayer for this, my alma mater, is for horizons to be broadened, global friendships to be strengthened, curriculum to reflect global theology, and the mission in the world to be sharpened. Friends, let's go look for crocodiles on the beach together. Thank you.
All right. She's still here. Reverend George Davis will come for his response, and then I will call on my colleague Dana Harris to help us with the continuation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you need a stretch break, by the way? Why don't you just stand up, just everybody? I'm the pastor. I get to get away with stuff like this. I'm not going to ask you to scratch your friend's back, scratch your back next to you. But okay, well, thank you. You may be seated. I, too, want to thank our Dr. Ruiz for his presentation and, more importantly, for your contribution in making global awareness and engagement part of the ATS standards of accreditation. But now that we've heard this presentation, I think one question is this: how will we, as the Trinity community, respond? Now, on the one hand, it is possible to respond with a mindset of obligation. These are our accreditors. These are their standards. Somewhat like the student who sits at the back of the class wondering, what do I have to do to pass this course? And I think some of us have probably been that student. We can approach this conversation by thinking, what must we do to document that we have met these standards during our next accreditation review? That option is open to us. But I think during the presentation, we were offered another option as well. Because in this paper, we were encouraged to see these expectations not simply in terms of obligation, but more importantly, in terms of invitation. Specifically, we were invited to think carefully about global engagement within the framework of institutional integrity. So let me refine my original question and ask this: how will we, as the Trinity community, respond in a way that reflects our institutional commitments and identity? This question can be helpful in our ongoing conversation, and I want to join that conversation by highlighting 3 commitments that can be part of our institutional engagement with these standards. First, I think we can engage these expectations with a commitment to biblical faithfulness. Arguably, as a community committed to the authority of Scripture, if any institution should have the tools to think carefully about cultural and global engagement, it's us. As an example, let me just commend to you just a recent book by a member of our own faculty, Steve Bryan. The book is entitled Cultural Identity and the Purposes of God. It's a biblical theology of ethnicity, nationality, and race. Central to Steve's argument is the recognition that God's creative design does not entail only a vision for individuals, it also involves a vision for groups of people. For instance, he argues, quote, "The divine commission to fill the earth is fulfilled not simply by populating the earth with peoples, rather the divine intention plays out as humanity fills the earth with culturally distinct peoples." Brian goes on to trace themes such as cultural identity and ethnicity throughout the biblical storyline and shows how the scriptures provide a framework for engaging groups across cultural boundaries. Now, for us, one of the reasons robust biblical faithfulness is so important is that without it, we are vulnerable to blind spots. For example, I think due to a variety of factors, for those of us who are American evangelicals, we have a tendency to understand Christianity in highly individualistic terms. To show you what I mean, let me invite you to try this experiment, right? The next time you're in a Sunday school class or a home Bible study or your small group, and it's just a moment of light conversation, say, I was asked to bring this up in this environment, and ask your friends or your group of friends this question. What do you think are the major themes and purposes of the book of Romans? Now, most likely you will hear responses like this. Well, Romans, that's the theology book of the Bible, right? Or something like, that's the book that describes how we come into relationship with God and how we grow in that relationship through the process of sanctification. Moreover, you may hear someone begin to recount certain verses from Romans that explain the plan of salvation, particularly those of us who grew up Southern Baptist, right? We grew up with the Romans road. However, you will probably not hear someone stating that one of the purposes of Romans is to address social and ethnic conflict between different groups in this church. Interestingly, in his recent book on Romans, Scott McKnight argues that the entire book builds to a crescendo in addressing this ethnic conflict within the Roman congregation. Nonetheless, it's common for us, particularly those of us who grew up in kind of American evangelicalism, to overlook this emphasis on ethnic and group harmony. However, if, in the words of Steve Bryan again, God's vision for his kingdom is a people of peoples, I think we must work intentionally at understanding the biblical storyline and the ways in which it confronts our blind spots in cross-cultural engagement and interaction. This commitment to biblical faithfulness leads to a second commitment that I will highlight. That commitment involves a posture of humility and curiosity. Unfortunately, it can be easy for American institutions to pursue international education and cross-cultural relationships in an asymmetrical manner. That is, we can approach it with the assumption that we are the ones with the knowledge, we are the ones with the power, we are the ones with the resources. Too often, we have practiced patronage and we have called it partnership. I was reminded of this in a conversation I had with a president of a seminary in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. As our friendship developed over several years, I eventually gained the courage to ask him this question. I said, is there something you would like to tell American Christians that you don't always feel like you have the freedom to tell them? And he paused. He thought very carefully. And then he responded. And here's what he would like to say to American Christians. He said, I love your energy and your creativity. I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit. But, and he paused, he said, but you do not listen. If we're to avoid the type of relationships that seminary president was describing, I think it will require a commitment to humility and curiosity. That is, as we engage our educational mission locally and globally, we must lead with questions, not answers. And we must recognize that there can be much for us to learn in each of these relationships. Finally, let me mention a third commitment. It's a commitment to a holistic strategy, and here's what I mean by that. I think it's the Hiebert Center needs to address them. This is their field and their responsibility. However, if we are truly shaped by the biblical vision mentioned earlier, we will realize that these issues are not simply the responsibility of one particular department. They should involve our institution holistically. For instance, these issues are not only important to our international partnerships, they are also important to the way we train pastors and leaders who will only serve in the United States. As has already been mentioned, in the age of globalization, there are already so many ways in which the world is coming to us. As an example, I serve as a pastor in Hershey, Pennsylvania. It is probably not high on your list of cosmopolitan communities. In fact, unlike many of you, I can go to bed and hear cows. Of course, we do have street lights shaped in the design of Hershey chocolates. You will not find that on Michigan Avenue, but in any case, interestingly, the largest employer in Hershey is not the chocolate company. It's the Medical College and Research Hospital of Penn State University, which has a growing international community. In fact, in the next 3 months, that hospital, for instance, will be welcoming 120 international traveling nurses on 3-year contracts. Thus, the issue of global engagement is not simply related to one department of our institution. It is related to the work of Trinity holistically. And we should approach these issues with that in mind. So the ongoing conversation that today's meeting has encouraged is a conversation about what global engagement and awareness looks like for us as the Trinity community. I've suggested that our response should be grounded in biblical faithfulness that leads to a posture of humility and curiosity and fosters a holistic strategy. I look forward to seeing how this ongoing conversation unfolds and what all of you can add to it. Again, Dr. Ruiz, I want to thank you for your leadership in this effort, and thank you for challenging us to think through what it means for Trinity within our doctrinal and institutional commitments to engage the world well. Thank you.
Okay. You are here. I thank you, Reverend Davis. Now we have 3 presenters who have delivered the burdens that God has given them to deliver to us. So we are now ready for the next half hour to be in conversation around tables. And I'm going to call my colleague Dana Harris to set the table for us for the conversation until 5 o'clock now. And the only thing I would say as you are here, just for the fun of it, since you are a pastor in Hershey, the very fact that chocolate has been produced in that place for so long is a witness to globalization, because as far as we know, cocoa does not grow in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And most people don't realize that 78% of the chocolate produced in the world used to be produced between Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria. So we all eat globalized chocolate without realizing it. Anyway.
One of the things we found in these kinds of situations and having really stimulating, rich conversations is the ability to then have a conversation around a table. And so I just want to express my appreciation also to Dr. Ruiz for really just such rich comments, many things to think about, and then for our 2 responders who gave us many questions. So on your table, you're going to find a sheet that has questions. The goal is certainly not to checklist through these. In fact, you may engage them or engage many of the questions that were given to us by our 2 responders. Any of those are fine. I really love this idea, though, of the language of invitation. I thank you for that. We've been invited to think about this at a much deeper level, but also I think all along, when we look at just the richness and the fullness of the earth and God's glory, we are invited to participate in something that is so much bigger, so much more glorious, so much more compelling than any of the small visions we could ever come up with. So I invite you all now to a conversation around the table. If you want to designate a leader, you may do that. Sometimes it helps to kind of break the ice. If you have a lot of people at your table and not so many people at your other neighboring table, maybe you can kind of even yourselves out a little bit. And again, this is open. One of the questions that I found that was very compelling, Dr. Ruiz supplied these questions for us, but one that I thought was really good is, how might, and we could maybe add to that, how has already, if that's English grammar correct, global engagement enhanced the identity and practices of your school? I think it has significantly enhanced, but then Dr. Moore has challenged us to not stay, but to invite ourselves to go further. So we'll have 15 minutes or so around the table for discussion. The time is yours. And then we'll come back and we'll have a group question and answer and discussion with Dr. Ruiz and our responders. Okay, start talking.